أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله أما بعد فأعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم ألم ترى أن الفلك تجري في البحر بنعمة الله ليريكم من آياته إن في ذلك لآيات لكل صبار شكور. I have recited verse 32 of chapter 31, Surah Al-Luqman, and the translation is as follows. Do you not see that the ships sail on the ocean by the favor of Allah, that He may show you of His signs? Therein surely are signs for everyone who is patient and grateful, unquote. Ships have been around since the dawn of mankind. The earliest civilizations, such as the Egyptians and the Mesopotamians, made use of ships for transport. The hieroglyphs featured ships going north and south on the Nile. Ships have benefited mankind for business and trade, defense of nations, and led to the discovery of the New World. It was a ship that saved a prophet and his people, and it was a ship that brought the community of the promised Messiah ﷺ to this land. And as Allah reminds us in this verse, ships are indeed a bounty for mankind and one of His signs. Respected Naiba Mir Sahib and my dear brothers, sisters, children, today I have been asked to speak on modern day challenges to Islam and our response. And we can look to this sign of Allah, the ships at sea, for some guidance. Now we can all appreciate that in order for a ship to get to its destination, all of the proper tools for navigation must be in order. Captains of ships have long relied on maps and compasses, latitude and longitude, and they even look to the stars above for guidance, for direction. But what happens when a ship loses its bearings? It loses its sense of direction. Well, this is happening today because godlessness in our society is on the rise. And people who revert to atheism are like those who are without a spiritual compass. They are lost at sea. And I would humbly submit that this is one of the 21st century challenges to Islam. Earlier this year, one of National Geographic magazine's headlines read, and I quote, "The world's newest major religion is no religion." And this article pointed to a study which found that atheism and agnosticism is rising fastest among millennials, meaning those born in 1980 or later. And 1 in every 9 people in this generation were born and raised in homes completely devoid of religion. And a Pew Research study showed in 2012 that 1/3 of all people between age 19 and 29 could not identify with any faith. So our youth are growing up in an age where indifference to religion is gone mainstream, whether it's on television and media or in printed books or magazines or on college campuses. And more people of faith, especially Christians, are leaving their religion for atheism. And we know that there are popular proponents of atheism that are actively debating people of religion, including Muslims. So who will answer this challenge, this new challenge of atheism in the 21st century? Now, the subject of atheism is very vast, and many discourses can be given on this, and it's beyond the scope of this talk. But allow me to share just one small excerpt from the writings of Promised Messiah al-Islam with regard to atheism, just to illustrate an example. Masih Maud al-Islam wrote in his landmark first book, Brahine Ahmadiyya, and I will quote an excerpt, quote, "Search for God is a difficult matter. Observation of the heavens and the earth and reflection of the perfect order of the universe only leads to the conclusion that the universe should have a creator. Yet it is not proof that such a creator exists. There is a difference between should be and is. The only way of acquiring certainty is to experience God by having a conversation with Him, or by witnessing his extraordinary signs, unquote. Now, once during the time of the Promised Messiah, ﷺ, there lived a man, and he was on the verge of atheism. He was a spiritual person, but he lost that spirituality, and he started to think that God did not exist. And he basically admitted that he had become spiritually detached. And one day he came across Brahine Ahmadiyya, and he began reading it. And then one night, it was a cold January night, as he was reading this book, he came across this passage. And of course, the English I read doesn't do justice to the original Urdu that the Promised Messiah ﷺ wrote. But he came across this particular passage of the Promised Messiah ﷺ in which he talks about the difference between thinking there should be a God and the yaqeen that there is a God, the should be and the is. And he later would say that he felt like it was a dead person that had come back to life. He said that he entered that night in a state of kufr, disbelief, but he was in the state of being a Muslim the next morning. Such was the impact of this beautiful analysis of the existence of God to an atheist. And that man was Mian Muhammadin, who later accepted Ba'ath. And it so happened that Mian Muhammadin, he had this mindset that he wanted to debate people about the truth of Ahmadiyya, but he had this uneasiness inside of him. He had this lack of confidence that he may not be able to articulate the arguments in defense of Ahmadiyya because he's just not fully equipped with the knowledge to do so. And it so happened he was massaging the feet of the Promised Messiah ﷺ in Masjid Mubarak one night, and many companions used to do this. It was a blessing to do so. And the Promised Messiah ﷺ was facing away from him and lying down. And Mian Muhammadin started thinking about this. He started thinking, how am I going to debate people about Ahmadiyya when I am not equipped with this knowledge? And as he was thinking this, right then and there, the Promised Messiah ﷺ turned around and he looked at Muhammadin Sahib and he said in a very loud and majestic voice, a voice that made Mian Sahib shake. He said, and I quote, "One who reads our books will never be vanquished." Without any word being said, Masih Maud al-Islam told it to Muhammadin. And this anecdote illustrates two lessons for us. The first lesson is that there is inherent wisdom in the Quran, in Islam, in the writings of Masih Maud al-Islam, that can convince a skeptic, an atheist, that there is a God. And secondly, it's a reminder to us that we need to equip ourselves with this knowledge by reading the writings of the Promised Messiah al-Islam if we want to win the hearts of those who deny the existence of God. Because ultimately, we believe that Islam is that religion, that only religion that can give light, be like a beacon of light to someone who is without a spiritual compass, a ship lost at sea. And there's an old saying that there are no atheists on a sinking ship. That's a well-known phrase. There are no atheists on a sinking ship. And interestingly, this idea probably found its roots in the Holy Quran, because Allah Ta'ala actually describes the course of a non-believer by likening it to a voyage at sea. In chapter 10, verse 23, Allah Ta'ala says, and I quote, "He it is who enables you to journey through land and sea until, when you are on board the ships, and they sail with them with a fair breeze, and they rejoice in it, there overtakes the ships a violent wind, and the waves come on them from every side, and they think they are encompassed, and only then they call upon Allah," unquote. So here we are reminded that an atheist may deny the existence of God, but when his ship is about to sink, he thinks of God. And it is said that God listens to the prayers of the distressed, even an atheist. So while atheism is a growing challenge to Islam, if we are equipped with the rational arguments which Islam provides, and we are strong in our own beliefs, our own convictions, inshallah, we can win the hearts and minds of those unfortunate ones that are lost at sea. Now, it's not just enough for a ship to have its navigation in order, to have its bearings. To get to its destination, we all know that a ship must be equipped with all of the components: an engine to speed up, sails to guide with the wind, rudders to change direction, and an anchor to take shelter in the harbor. These are all the essentials of sea navigation, as we all know. And this brings us to another challenge to Islam, which is the claim that Islam is devoid of leadership, that it is without the components, so to speak, to steer the ship. There are 1.6 billion Muslims on earth, but the Muslim world is fragmented now more than ever before, just as the Holy Prophet ﷺ had predicted. But we believe, as Ahmadi Muslims, that the solution to this challenge was provided by the Holy Quran in the form of the second manifestation of God, known as Khilafat. So I would humbly submit that Khilafat is our sail and it is our anchor. We are living in an age where the Muslim world is being scrutinized in all directions, both outside and within. So the question is, who will be that voice for Islam? That's the challenge. And we can just look at modern day headlines that we're all familiar with to know who that voice could be. And let me give you some examples. When terrorists stormed and killed journalists in the satirical French magazine Charlie Hebdo in Paris, the world began a fierce debate about the limits of freedom of speech. And it was our beloved Hazur who condemned the violence, but he also reminded us that freedom of speech is not a license to abuse. And thereby he defended the honor of the Holy Prophet ﷺ in doing so. He was the only Muslim leader in the world who presented that logic, condemning both the violence, but also showing that there's limits to freedom of speech, and the honor of the Holy Prophet ﷺ should be defended by all of us. When Daesh, ISIS, when they rose to power, Hazur not only condemned their brutality, but he questioned the financing of this regime. And he pointed to the obvious hypocrisy of calling this the Islamic State, because he said the true Islamic State would represent the Holy Prophet ﷺ's vision of civil rights and religious pluralism. Islam, he said, in no way could be represented by such a group. This was at a speech at York University in Toronto just a few months ago. When the refugee crisis spilled over onto the world stage, it was Hazur who urged support for the millions that were displaced. He advised nations to utilize the potential of refugees, but at the same time, he urged that refugees should assimilate into their country, obey their laws, and he also warned of the threat of extremists who are guised as refugees. This was to the Dutch Parliament. When attempts at banning the wearing of hijabs on French beaches became world news, it was Hazur who called out the inherent problem in regulating religious practice. He said that this overreach would threaten the peace of society. This was an address to Canadian Parliament. So Hazur has written to countless world leaders about World War III and the impending clouds of a global war, and about justice in an unjust world. And we can go on with examples and examples of this. But the point is that every ship needs a commander, one commander at the helm. And this challenge to Islam can only be answered by Khilafat. Now, ships at sea are also tested and challenged. They're tested by the elements, by weather, by creatures that lurk unseen below the surface of the water. And this brings us to another challenge to Islam in the 21st century. How do we uphold our identity as Muslims in this environment we live in, an environment of Islamophobia? Because these are the constant threats that will seek to sink our ships. Our identity as Muslims is surrounded by turbulent waters, particularly for our youth. So here, I specifically am addressing our young brothers and sisters in the audience, Qudam, Lajna, Atfal, and Nasrat. Look to one ship in particular. It was a ship that safeguarded a whole nation from the wrath of Almighty Allah. It was the ark built during the time of Prophet Noah. Prophet Noah was a law-bearing prophet, and he was a God-fearing person. But people at his time drifted away from God, and they began replacing God with idols. And Allah sent his messenger to steer these people back to him. And we all know the story. Noah begged for God's help, and God promised him victory. So Noah pleaded with the people to worship the one true God, but it fell on deaf ears. And the people branded Noah a liar, a madman. And so God instructed Noah to build an ark for the believers to take shelter in. Would it float on land? That is what the enemies mocked Noah with. And all the while, Hazrat Noah begged for God's help, crying day and night for his blessings and his guidance and his mercy. And as Allah Ta'ala says in the Holy Quran, chapter 54, and I quote, "We opened the gates of heaven with water pouring down, and we caused the earth to burst forth with springs, so the two waters met for a purpose that was decreed." Noah brought aboard animals, believers, and family members who believed in him. And the glorious ark, perhaps the greatest ship that was ever created, embarked on its journey amidst a torrential flood. And then Allah Ta'ala says, we carried him upon that which was made of wooden planks and nails. It floated on under our eyes. Wooden planks and nails. Noah called for his son to repent and get on board the ark, but his son insisted that he would take higher ground. And then Noah warned him, there is no shelter for anyone this day except from the decree of Allah, except those to whom he shows his mercy. And as we all know, the flood overtake all of those who didn't board that blessed ship. And when the waters finally receded, only the believers survived. And Allah Ta'ala says in the Holy Quran, we saved him and those that were with him in the ark, and we made them inheritors of the land, unquote. Inheritors of the land. So my dear brothers and sisters, in this day and age, the inheritors of the land are those that have sought refuge in the ark of the Messiah, alayhi salam. There are wooden planks and nails all around us for us to build our arks. Are we really building them? It is early morning and your alarm goes off, and do you hit the snooze button? Or do you rise for the call to prayer? Because Islam tells us that prayer is better than sleep. So you offer salat, you wake up your siblings, and you have nailed the first plank in building your ark. You are now going to school, but before you get your morning coffee, do you stop and lower your window for the homeless man who is hungry and desperate? After all, the Holy Prophet ﷺ taught us that a believer's shade on the day of resurrection will be his charity. So you help the man, you give him sadaqah, and another panel is placed on your ark. Your day continues and your phone is alive with snaps, tweets, Facebook likes. Do you spend the next hour consumed in your own vanity or in aimless chats with virtual friends? Or do you pick up a book? Do you read an article? Do you study the world around you? Because the Prophet ﷺ taught us that opportunity is something that is quick to vanish and late to return. And as the Quran reminds us, man is ever in a state of loss. So you decide to spend your time in learning, reflection, expanding your knowledge, and yet another panel is placed on your ark. Your day goes on, you're at lunch, and a friend offers you a drug. Just one joint, it won't hurt, he says. Do you accept the offer or do you move along? Because if you think just one time wouldn't hurt, or an Ahmadi Muslim could never become addicted to drugs, think again. You remember what the Quran says about how intoxicants are unlawful because the harms outweigh the benefits, so you decline the offer, and another panel is placed on your ark. Your classes are now over, and a few of your friends invite you to their house for a party, a get-together, mixed with men and women. Just a simple hangout, it seems harmless. But if you think this environment can't lead to dating or falling into temptation, even for an Ahmadi Muslim, then think again. You ponder over the Islamic injunction that parda is for men, not just women, and to keep company with the righteous, lower your gaze, and so you respectfully decline their offer. And yet another panel is placed on your ark. And now you're ready to go home. And as you're walking across campus, a crowd of people start calling you a terrorist. They tell you to leave this country. They make fun of the scarf around your head or the beard on your face. So do you fight back? Do you go into hiding? Or do you reflect on what the Quran reminds us, that when the ignorant address you, you say salam, you say peace. So you engage in prayer. You pick up your pen, you write to your school paper, you defend your faith, and you invite people to your mosque for dialogue. And another panel is placed on that ark. And finally, you come home and you offer congregational salat with your family and you express your gratitude to God. Your ark has never looked so strong, so sturdy, so ready to endure the floods that are all around. But remember that just getting onto that ark doesn't ensure protection. Every one of us is vulnerable. Me, you, my children, your children, every one of us is vulnerable. And prayer is what made the ark sail. Hazrat Noah boarded that ark, and he boarded the ark by saying a prayer. And as we know, our only true safe harbor in the tempest is our merciful God. So my dear brothers and sisters, with planks and nails, build your arks. Bring your friends and family on board, because history is a lesson for us. Now, you may say that your challenges are much different than what my challenges were growing up, and I may say that my challenges were very different from what my parents' challenges were. But every generation has to endure their own flood. And remember, the Ark of Noah was built when the skies were blue. Don't sit and wait for the flood to come. Build your ark now. And adapt to your surroundings. The pessimist will complain about the wind. The optimist will expect the wind to change. But the realist will adjust the sails. We live in very, very challenging times. To be a Muslim in America means that you may stand out, but you may also be singled out. Just remember that the history of Islam is a history of enduring hardship. This is not a unique time. Only yesterday, our beloved Hazur in his Friday sermon talked about this. He said that we find from the Holy Quran that all messengers have been opposed, ridiculed, and interfered with, and have been resisted. When the Holy Prophet Muhammad ﷺ was run out of his home and persecuted by the people of Taif, he begged for Allah's mercy. The angel Gabriel appeared before him and invited him to just express his desire, and Allah would wipe out the people of Taif. But the Prophet ﷺ declined because he hoped their children would one day grow up to become Muslim. So is there any greater example of enduring hardship than our beloved Master? The promised Messiah alayhi salam, with his 14-year-old son, Hazrat Muslim Maud, at his side, would walk through the streets with people hurling abuses, hurling stones at him. But he carried his message from the remote village of Qadian to the world, fearlessly and with full trust in Allah. So are we not followers of Hazrat Masih Maud alayhi salam? When 86 souls lost their lives during the Lahore attacks in 2010, did Ahmadis retreat into hiding? Did they retaliate? No. They prayed to Allah. And then the widows of the martyrs instructed their sons to return to the mosque the very next week and sit in the exact spot where their fathers gave their lives. Endurance and courage, patience and tolerance, and above all, prayer and trust in Allah, these make up the DNA of the Jamaat of Masih Maud alayhi salam. Islamophobia in America is not new to us as Ahmadi Muslims. In fact, Islam in America saw its roots in Ahmadiyyat at a time when Islam was not welcomed to this country a century ago. 100 years ago, the climate of racial tension was quite high, not just between whites and African Americans, but also Asian Americans and Indians. Those of the Indian subcontinent in the early 1920s were called ragheads. They were discriminated against. That's our nation's history. But another important thing happened in our nation's history at that time, and this story also started with a ship. And I'll close with this story. The year was 1920, and the SS Haverford, a glorious ship, a transatlantic liner, set sail from Liverpool, England to Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. The voyage was very long, 3,300 miles, and it took 1 month. Aboard that ship were many passengers, including one man by the name of Mufti Muhammad Sadiq. He was a saintly figure with a dark complexion, a long gray beard, a green turban, and a soft voice. And he was on his way to America on the instruction of Hazrat Khalifatul Masih II. And his mission, to plant the seed of Ahmadiyyat in America, as was the vision and desire of the promised Messiah alayhi salam. It so happened that during that long voyage at sea, the ship got caught up in a fierce and dangerous storm. Passengers began crying for fear that they would drown into the ocean. And at that point, Mufti Saab came out onto the hull of the ship, and he addressed the sea in a majestic voice, and he said, "O ocean, don't you know that a servant of the promised Messiah alayhi salam is riding on you for not any personal reason, but in the service of Allah's Islam? Will you then hurt him?" Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. Mufti Saab would later write that his humble supplications on that ship that night were heard, and it seemed that God's angels had descended on that ship that stormy night, and it calmed the surrounding waves of the ocean. But that wasn't the only hurdle that Mufti Saab faced. Finally, when the ship reached the port of Philadelphia, another challenge presented itself. as Mufti Saab was arrested upon arrival. He was detained by immigration officials on suspicion that he landed in the country to preach polygamy. Because there was an act, the 1891 Immigration Act of the United States, that said that anybody who believes in polygamy cannot enter the country. So the immigration officers requested that he be deported. So Mufti Saab asked for a chance to present his case before the court, and they put him in jail while he was awaiting final word. He spent 7 long weeks in prison, and every day in prison he would do tabligh, he would preach to the inmates, and every night he would engage in intense prayers on a prayer mat in the prison cell. And he once said, almost every night I meet with the promised Messiah al-Islam, or his first Khalifa, or Hazrat Fazl Umar. I am with my own family at night, and my days are spent among strangers. 7 long weeks in jail. He wrote letters to Hazrat Muslim Maud radhiyallahu anhu for prayers, and Hazur assured him that nothing could stop his mission to America. And eventually, Mufti Saab was allowed to face his judge. And what he said to the judge is recorded in history. Not in our own Jamaat history, this has been recorded by non-Muslim historians. Mufti Sadiq presented before the judge an argument, and he said that Islamic law allows him to be in this country, because he explained the difference between what is permissible and what is obligatory in Islam. He explained that the practice of polygamy is not obligatory for Muslim men. It is a permissible act for very specific circumstances, but we are also required in the Quran to obey the laws of the land and those in authority to us. So he had no permission to even engage in this act because the United States law wouldn't allow him to. He presented this argument before the judge, and the judge accepted his case, and he reversed the decision, and Mufti Saab was free to go. And during those 7 weeks in that Philadelphia detention house, Mufti Muhammad Sadiq radhiyallahu anhu converted 19 people to Islam. The sacrifice that Mufti Muhammad Sadiq radhiyallahu anhu offered by going through the ordeal of confinement in the Philadelphia jail is significant not just in our Jamaat's history, it's significant in the United States of America's history. Because history now shows that Mufti Muhammad Sadiq radhiyallahu anhu was the first Muslim in US history to initiate a campaign to remove Islamic misconceptions about Islam and reverse a law that was based on this misunderstanding. So my dear brothers and sisters, we have in our nation's history an Ahmadi Muslim as a role model. Mufti Muhammad Sadiq radhiyallahu anhu overcame the perils of the Atlantic voyage, and then he overcame Islamophobia at the highest level, sanctioned by the United States government without the benefit of anything but faith in Almighty Allah and the intellect that Allah Ta'ala bestowed on him as a disciple of the promised Messiah alayhi salam. Nearly 1,000 souls accepted Ahmadiyya during Mufti Saab's 3.5 years in America after his release from detention that day. The ocean is a vast place, but it was conquered by ships. Anal fulka tajri fil bahre bi ni'matillah. Ships which sail on the sea by the favor of Allah. Whether it is the Ark of Noah as a sign for the protection of our generation, or the ship that carried Mufti Sadiq as a symbol of hope for Islam in a country that we love so dearly, we must look to these examples as we embrace the challenges of this century as Ahmadi Muslims. I close with an excerpt from the writings of the promised Messiah al-Islam, who rightfully said, "Ab meri taraf doro ke waqt hai, jo shakhs is waqt meri taraf dorta hai, main usko usi tashbih deta hoon कि जो ऐं तूफान के वक्त जहाज़ पर बैठ गया, लेकिन जो शख्स मुझे नहीं मानता, मैं देख रहा हूँ कि वो तूफान में अपने तई डाल रहा है और कोई बचने का सामान उसके पास नहीं। सच्चा शफ़ी मैं हूँ जो इस बुज़ुर्ग शफ़ी का साया हूँ और उसका ज़िल जिसको इस ज़माना के अंधों ने कबूल ना किया और उसके बहुत ही तहकीर की, यानी हज़रत मोहम्मद मुस्तफ़ा सल्लल्लाहु अलैहि वसल्लम." The promised Messiah al-Islam wrote, "Now rush towards me, because this is the time that he who runs towards me now is like the one who gets on board the ship right at the time of the storm. But if someone does not accept me, I see that he is throwing himself into a storm that has no means of saving itself. I am a true intercessor as a shadow and reflection of that exalted intercessor who is not accepted by the ignorant people of the age and who is gravely insulted, that being the Holy Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, unquote. May Allah be our guide and our helper. May He protect us and our children in the Kishti-e-Nu, the Ark of the Messiah, with His mercy and His blessings, inshallah. Ameen. Wa akhiru da'wahum anil hamdulillahi rabbil alamin.